I'm going to just encourage you, if you're not sitting around someone yet, because kind of the kids leave sort of a chasm, find a spot to gather around somebody, because there's actually going to be a time of discussion after I share a little bit. We take some time to share a story from Jesus' life. We believe that Jesus was the most amazing human to ever walk the earth. In fact, he was God, and we want to learn from him. We want to learn his way, and so I'm going to be sharing a little bit from Scripture. But yeah, this is my first time back and teaching again, and so yeah, I don't know. You'll be able to be the judge if I'm a 20% better human. But I think for me, over the last 6 weeks, I actually felt like I just realized I'm 20% more just human. Not a better human, but I found my limits. You know, when you pause to rest, I don't know if you've been on a vacation or you've gotten a day off, and you just feel like, oh, wow, I didn't realize how tired I was, right? And what I realized also is that my faults are still there. Yep, my faults, my limits, the things that make me anxious. In fact, sometimes when you slow down, they're there even more, right? But I ask you guys to share maybe something that you're bad at, and I obviously have to go there too. One of the things I've come to terms with, especially over the last few years, is that I'm actually a terrible driver. Okay, I was driving with Heather Douglas, and she said, "Do you want to drive?" I'm like, "Oh no, I try not to," is what I said. Yeah, I'm not a good driver. And I'm easily distracted, especially with kids. And I think at 36, I can own that. And I've been in multiple accidents that are my fault. So, I mean, not to scare you, but it's a fault I've realized and come to terms with in my life. And so, actually, we did a lot of road trips, and Rosie actually asked me, my daughter, she said, "Why is it that Daddy drives more?" And I thought, this is a moment to stand up for women, you know? Like, and I said, he's just a better driver than Mom. I was just honest, okay? But, okay, so admitting your faults, admitting something you're bad at, maybe there's like lower level offenses, like you're a bad driver. I feel like in society that we might do better with that. But that might feel more acceptable than something like I struggle with drinking, or I struggle with my anger. Like, if we really kind of get to those deeper places, like, it's going to be a conversation stopper. It's not really something we talk about a lot, right? Or maybe pornography has always been a struggle of yours. And so if you're honest, like, if you're really honest, you don't really care about your partner's feelings right now. You're really struggling with your partner, your husband or your wife. So whatever it is, it's not really a common thing that we're honest about what we're good at or what we're bad at. We don't want that to be displayed. And so I really want to ask you something. When someone calls you out on something, I mean, I've been called out that I'm a bad driver. I've been pulled over multiple times, that sort of thing. But when someone calls you out on something, when you're caught, is how it might feel, how do you respond? Maybe just take a second to think about that. I know that when I get called out on something, I have a physical response. Like, I get flushed, my face gets beet red, I feel embarrassed, my jaw might tighten, like I get tense. And I almost always think of a way, start thinking about a way to talk myself out of it. I want to defend myself, because I'm not really that bad. Or what made you think that? That voice that we immediately go to defensiveness a lot of times. And I just want you to kind of wonder about that. I want you to wonder about that as we go on. And so when we've done something wrong, or when we need forgiveness in our lives, when we realize we're humbled or need help with something, that we're not good at something, might be faulted, the Bible would call this an opportunity for mercy. Mercy. It's a word we don't really use that often. As we were talking about it with our staff, Kara was reminded of when she would say mercy when someone was like tickling her, you know. It's not like a common word or phrase we use, but it's when we need that forgiveness. We know that we've done something wrong. We realize we need help. The Bible calls this mercy. And I feel, if I'm going to lay my cards on the table, Jesus has been talking to me a lot about mercy in my life. We've been in this kind of focus on people sharing stories about Jesus, that Jesus is, and And I would say just simply, Jesus' mercy. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. So I want to ask you another question. Do you actually think that you need mercy in your life? BK says yes. She might know the answer to the story today. Do you think that you really need mercy? But you know what? If we're honest, do we live like we need mercy? Do we live like we need mercy? We need forgiveness. We need redos. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that as adults, which most people are here, adults don't like receiving mercy. We don't like admitting the things that we've done wrong. And I would say it's often something it's easier to extend. I'm a parent. I feel like I have to give out mercy all the time. Okay, you did something wrong again. Let me try to teach you and forgive you and show you a different way. But what about when we're on the receiving end of it? And so I also want to just mention that I think there's some on the opposite end of the spectrum. Maybe instead of trying to always do it right so that you don't need mercy, to people who are always putting themselves down and think that they're just a terrible and wretched person. That's the spectrum that I think we're going to look at and that we find ourselves on. And so I really don't think that's what Jesus would want you to feel either. Maybe you've been in some church contexts where when we talk about our faults, it's about sort of shaming you to make you feel so bad that you need Jesus. That is not what I'm doing here today. That is not what I want to do here today. And I don't think that's what Jesus wants to do. And that's why I want to bring out this story that we're going to be talking about. I want to share with you a quote before we get into our scripture. It's from a retired priest. His name's Thomas Merton. He's not alive anymore, but has had an impact on JD and I over our time away. He says this: some men or women are virtuous enough to forget that they're sinners without being wretched enough to remember that they need the mercy of God. I'm going to read it one more time. And I just want to acknowledge that some of you might be like, whoa, that's some strong language. And yes, we're going to break it down a little bit, though. Some men or women are virtuous enough to forget that they're sinners, that they make mistakes, without being wretched enough to remember that they need the mercy of God. I would call it the not that bad syndrome. I'm not that bad, okay? And I would also say this leads to the trap of self-sufficiency. I don't really need help. I can do it myself. And if I'll continue to be transparent. Is that something that we value here? Just because I'm holding this microphone does not mean that I have my life together more than you, okay? And so much of my life has been avoiding mercy, opportunities to need mercy, because honestly, I hated that feeling of being wrong. I hate feeling like I'm wrong because it's not easy to feel humbled. And so as we read this scripture together, you're going to see that Jesus actually had a pretty hard time with people who were afraid of being wrong. He actually had a harder time with people who were afraid of being wrong. So I'm going to read from Matthew 9. This is the story of when Jesus calls one of his disciples, Matthew, actually. It's in a book that he helped to write, ended up helping to write about Jesus. And Matthew becomes someone who follows him. And it's found in Matthew 9 through 12. And you can just, we love telling stories from Jesus' life because you can imagine it and you can think about, maybe where you find yourself in the story or if you have questions about it, and that's just fine. Matthew 9 through 12. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Now, tax collectors were known for unfortunately taking more than their share and cheating out the people that they were doing business with because they could. But Matthew was sitting at his tax collector's booth, and Jesus walks up to him and says, "Follow me and be my disciple. Join me." So Matthew got up and followed him. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as a dinner guest, along with many other tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum That's what this translation says. Or tax collectors and sinners. When Jesus heard this, he said this. Now, I think it's funny that they didn't actually ask him. They asked the disciples. Like, just be bold. Like, you're both teachers, but they're just kind of going around it in kind of a backwards way. Jesus said this. Healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I have come to call not those who think that they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. I've come to call those who think not who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. As I read this story, a few things jumped out to me. First was Jesus' relationship to Matthew. And the biggest thing, so Jesus knows, like this guy probably has cheated out a whole bunch of people. Probably has taken more than his share. And is at least despised by many of his community members because would have seen that he sort of betrayed his own people. He's an Israelite sort of working for the Roman government, which was an absolute no-no and a socially pretty damaging thing to do. But Jesus knew all that and probably knew the exact amount that Matthew had cheated others. And yet, Jesus wants to be around him. Jesus wants to be around those who need mercy. He needed forgiveness. He needed grace. He needed a second chance. What does Jesus do? He calls him and asks him to follow him. He doesn't say, let's clean up the act first. We don't see that in this scripture. He says, just come. Start walking with me. And he calls Matthew and not the Pharisees. Makes me wonder if maybe the Pharisees were there. They've been standing at a distance watching Jesus. So he calls the person who needs mercy and not those who think that they have it all together. Wow. I thought the church was supposed to be the people who had it all together. That's sarcasm. You can laugh. It's okay. We don't, right? So those who are honest with their need and their faults are the one who Jesus is drawn towards. And then he goes and has dinner at his house. So not only does he want to be around Matthew, but he wants to be around all his friends. And Matthew doesn't even hide that those are who his friends are. So secondly, the Pharisees' response really stands out to me. And they're of course criticizing Jesus, saying you're hanging out with this guy, and they were concerned about going into the temple, being clean, unclean. There was all sorts of rituals around that, and the Pharisees asked his disciples, not Jesus, kind of sulking around, and then the Pharisees, I really believe that, and that's why Jesus says this second piece about learning about mercy. The Pharisees have forgotten that mercy goes both ways. Because how much easier is it to be the giver of mercy than to be on the receiving end of forgiveness and of mercy? So I want to ask you, what's so difficult about mercy? Why do we as humans have a hard time with that? Whether you like that word or not, why is it hard to admit our faults? Why is it hard to take ownership over the things that maybe we missed? I want to show you something that has made an impact on my life. Normally, I wouldn't bring out a huge Post-it note to a middle of a park, but I thought, why not? Okay, I'll read to you at the top. This is called the Johari window. Love it when people name things after themselves. Who's Johari? I don't know. Some guy who does communication theory. And the top says, known to self, not known to self. This is a little graph that shows what we know about ourselves and what other people know about us, okay? So what other people see about us and what we know about ourselves. And you can kind of follow along on the quadrant. I'll just hold this for a second so you guys can read it. And so holding that question of what is so difficult about mercy? Now, pretty self-explanatory. If something that you know about me and I know about myself, that's open. That's out in the open. It's the arena. Something that I just know about myself and that you don't know about me, that's hidden. Okay? Or the facade, if we sort of are trying to present a certain way, but it's not actually true. Things that we both don't know, it's unknown. We don't know. We don't know about what's happening. Could be time related, could just be yet to be discovered. But this asterisk area, the blind spots, this is when we need mercy. Because it's things that other people see about us, things that we are having a hard time with, whether it be about our character or faults, and that we don't always see about ourselves. And I'm not just talking about spinach in your teeth. I will tell you if you have spinach in your teeth. I'm from California, and I'm going to be nice to you and tell you the truth, okay? Because that's awkward for everybody. I'm just staring at the spinach in your teeth, okay? But beyond that, this is hard. And you know what? When we live in community, when we're all following Jesus, we brush up against each other's faults. We brush up against each other's imperfections and the things that we're having a hard time with. And it's hard because what happens when someone calls us out on this? When someone says, wow, it seems like you're having a hard time with some jealousy. You're comparing a lot. What happens in you? I think a lot of times are maybe based upon how we've been treated in the past, but we get defensive. We try to cover it up. Maybe you think, well, then I'm worthless. You kind of take it too far, and you go to the place of shame. Maybe you go to the thought of like, well, you think you're better than me because you can see that? Or maybe you do think other people are better than you. Do you see how we can go so deeply? And I would say this is the area that when we notice things about each other, and of course it matters how we say it. Of course it matters just as much how we say it. How we come to each other and say, hey, I've observed this. But what if we were a community that asked each other to reflect one another? What if it was an open and honest place? We want these tables to be a place where we can be honest and loving, that truth and love. And that's something that the Pharisees, they couldn't get. They couldn't get. And so Jesus shows us this better way into relationship where we know that even if the blind spots are brought up or we get exposed, that we're loved. And so Matthew, I'm sure, as he walked and followed and became Jesus' friend, I'm sure he felt exposed. But he followed him to the end because he knew his love. He knew his love. That word that is used, it's actually a scripture back to Hosea, the Old Testament, when one of the prophets, and it's one of the most complex words for love because it can mean both mercy, needing mercy, and humility, needing God's kindness, and it can mean this committed, steadfast, never going anywhere type of love. I even have it tattooed on my arm. Okay, it's kind of weird. That happens to be the case. Because I want to spend my life trying to understand it. Trying to understand this love that doesn't make sense to me, that doesn't give up on me, and that doesn't give up on the people that I want to give up on. Everyone has given up on Matthew. I'm sure, all of his friends and family, but Jesus doesn't. In fact, he says, come, be with me and be a part of my family. What if the church was like that? What if really anyone was welcome? That's what we're trying to do here. And it's not easy, right? And so this word mercy or chesed is this beautiful thing because once you receive mercy and you're able to be forgiven, Jesus brings you in and says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. And so I just want to invite you to think about ways that maybe you can bring some things with Jesus and have an honest conversation with him about what maybe needs to come out into the open for you. or you need to be honest with him, or you go to a friend that knows you and cares about you, and you say, I think this is a struggle in my life. That's the type of community that Jesus wants us to have. And I really think, I'm finishing up here. I think I'm going long. Who knows? Obviously, I care about this. But Jesus has been inviting me to realize that I still need him. Because I don't know if you ever felt this way, but it kind of felt like this journey towards holiness or sanctification, those are fancy words for becoming more like Jesus, was actually me not needing to need him anymore. That one day I was going to be like him enough that I actually wouldn't even need Jesus. Ha! Kara laughs over here. No, but somehow we get in that thinking. Like if we're true good Christians, we actually don't need forgiveness anymore. No. Part of being human is needing his mercy. And what if we were just a little more honest with that? What if there was people in your life that you repeatedly went back to and just, you had the type of relationship that you could ask for forgiveness and feedback? Just this morning, I even had like a good quiet 20 minutes before children came in and started talking to me. It was a beautiful 20 minutes. So I thought, I'm good. I'm set. I started to do my little journaling thing. That morning was going great, but something set me off. And I struggle with reactivity, where I'm just quick to sort of jump in and assume and kind of overreact. And I thought, man, I even spent time with Jesus this morning. I thought that's supposed to set me up. I'm still human. I'm still being invited to grow and change, become more like him. And it's not an opportunity for me to just go and sulk. But before I went and finished up writing this message, I felt like Jesus said, why don't you just go and give your kids a hug? That's when we change, not just when we go away in shame. And so when I think of mercy, I think of those invitations. And Jesus says, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the humble, for they will see God. And so I really believe that when we receive Jesus' mercy and mercy from one another, we'll get to see God in our midst. So I want to invite you to share maybe what stands out to you from this. Maybe take one step of vulnerability, just like a little past the comfort zone. Not like, here's my whole life story and I'm going to tell you my greatest sin. No, what's just something that stood out to you? And if there's an invitation you felt like stood out to you, and we'll give you about 5-10 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll bring you back for some announcements.